The first fire of winter crackles to life in the hearth of House Whisperwood. Its light pushes back the long shadows of the coming cold, a small but brave act of defiance. Lady Elara begins a cherished tradition, calling her household to gather close. Tonight, they will share the old tales, stories that have strengthened their bonds and soothed anxious hearts for generations. As you settle in, wherever you are and whatever the hour, let the warmth of this fire reach you. By the end of our time together, you will feel a profound sense of peace, as if you too are wrapped in the safety of this great hall. We will uncover a forgotten secret sleeping deep beneath the castle stones and discover what it truly takes to rekindle a fading magic. What quiet hope do you carry into the long nights ahead? The warmth of the hearth seemed a world away as young Orin stood frozen in the dark. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat answering the stone's echoing clatter. He had only meant to brush the dust from an old tapestry, a simple task before bed, but his fingers had found not solid wall, but a gap. The heavy weave had swung inward on silent, ancient hinges, revealing a passage swallowed by shadows. Curiosity, that most dangerous of temptations, had pulled him inside. For a long moment, he did not dare to breathe, listening for the heavy tread of guards drawn by the noise, but only silence answered, a deep and dusty quiet that felt older than the castle itself. Summoning his courage, he took another step, his torch pushing back the gloom to reveal walls covered in paintings. The colors were faded, the figures stylized and strange, yet the story they told was unmistakable. Here was a great tree with leaves of silver and a figure receiving a crown from its branches. There, a family kneeling before a heart of living stone. These were the founding myths of the great houses, scenes known only from songs, rendered here by hands that had witnessed their truth. He traced a finger over a depiction of a white-haired king raising a city from the sea, the pigment crumbling at his touch. He was not just in a hidden corridor. He was walking through the very memory of the realm, a secret history sleeping in the stone, and with that realization came a new, more profound fear. Had his clumsy footstep truly gone unheard, or was this silence merely the patience of something waiting in the dark ahead? The sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps broke the thick silence, and Orin's blood ran cold. He turned, torch shaking in his hand, to see the formidable frame of Captain Kaelen filling the narrow passage. The captain's face, usually a mask of stern duty, was unreadable in the flickering light, his eyes scanning the ancient murals before settling on the boy. Orin braced for a sharp reprimand for the end of his secret adventure, but the captain's voice, when it came, was low and measured, carrying not anger, but a quiet awe. He asked what Orin had found, his own calloused hand reaching out to gently trace the painted heart of stone, a symbol of his own house's founding. In that moment, an unspoken agreement passed between them. Kalin made a choice, one that went against every protocol of his station. He would not report the boy. Instead, he would become his silent guardian in this hidden world. He understood that this was more than a child's mischief. It was a rediscovery of something vital, a thread connecting them all to a past they had nearly forgotten. Their alliance was sealed not with a vow, but with a shared look of wonder in the torchlight. Yet as they stood together, the seasoned soldier felt a familiar chill, the instinct of a man who has seen how fragile peace can be. He knew that knowledge, especially knowledge long buried, carries its own weight and its own danger. A secret like this was a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples would inevitably spread, reaching shores they could not yet see. A deep chill, one that had nothing to do with the winter air, lingered on Captain Kaelen's shoulders long after he and Orin had sealed the hidden passage. It was a feeling of being watched by the stones themselves, a sensation Lady Elara seemed to share as she sought the simple comfort of her embroidery. The castle's weaving chamber was a sanctuary of color and soft sound, the air thick with the scent of wool and dye. Lyra, the master weaver, was at her great loom, her hands a blur as she guided a shuttle of deep blue thread through the warp. The tapestry growing before her was not one of simple decoration. It showed the familiar sigils of the great houses, but they were woven into the roots of a colossal, silver-leaf tree, its branches stretching up toward an unseen sky. Elara's request for thread was barely spoken before she was drawn into the emerging image, her own unease reflected in the weaver's intense focus. Lyra's hand stilled, and she confided in a hushed tone that the patterns were no longer born from her own imagination. For nights, her dreams had been haunted by a presence, a vast and slumbering beast, curled in a cavern of living rock deep beneath the castle foundations. She did not know its name or its nature, only that it was ancient, and that it was dreaming too, and in its dreams it was whispering to her, compelling her hands to weave its form into the fabric of their history. This was no mere story from the past, she explained, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and purpose. It was a living secret, and it was asking to be remembered. The threads she now used were not just wool and dye, but the very substance of a prophecy, and each pass of the shuttle felt like an act of waking something that had slept for 1,000 years. The scent of damp earth and night-blooming flowers filled the glass gardens, a world away from the chill of stone corridors. Orin found the gardener Brahm kneeling beside a plant, unlike any other, its leaves shimmering with a soft, metallic light, as if dusted by starlight. Brahm's gnarled fingers, more accustomed to rough soil than delicate petals, hovered near a single, closed bud, with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. He spoke without looking up, his voice a low rustle like wind through dry leaves. He told Orin this was a star petal, a plant that drinks moonlight and only opens its heart on the clearest of winter nights. The last time its flowers shone this brightly, he said, was many years ago, during a winter so still you could hear the snow settle on the castle roofs. And with that brilliant flowering came the whispers from the lower crypts, not the scuttling of rats or the drip of water, but the soft, shuffling footfalls of something that did not belong. No one ever saw a face, only the suggestion of a tall, slender shadow that retreated around corners just as a torch was raised. It never harmed a soul, never touched a single offering left for the dead. It simply moved through the deepest dark, a silent presence that made the hounds whimper and the bravest guards hesitate at the top of the stairwell. Brahm finally looked at Orin, his old eyes grave. Some believed it was a forgotten spirit, drawn to the surface by the plant's strange light. Others feared it was a warden, he said, a guardian of some deeper secret that was beginning to stir. The flower's brilliance was not just a beautiful omen, it was a signal, a key turning in a lock no one knew existed. And as Brahm fell silent, the warm, humid air of the garden suddenly felt thin and cold, the vibrant greens and silvers around them seeming less like a sanctuary and more like a beautiful, silent warning. The warmth of the kitchens was a welcome embrace after the garden's chill. Great copper pots simmered over the main hearth, their steam carrying the rich scents of mulling spices and baking bread. Head cook Marta moved through the organized chaos with the calm authority of a general, her voice a steady rhythm above the clatter of knives and crockery. Tonight, she was preparing the spiced honey wine, a recipe known only to the women of her line, a tradition as old as the castle stones themselves. She called for her apprentice, Finn, a boy with flour-dusted cheeks and wide, earnest eyes. Her instruction was simple, yet it sent a ripple of unease through the kitchen staff. He was to fetch a specific clay jar of honey from the deepest pantry, the one tucked away in the cold, quiet part of the cellar. That pantry, the older cooks whispered, was not just a storage room. Its curved back wall was the original castle well, sealed over with stone and mortar generations ago. Finn, eager to prove his worth, took a small lantern and descended the narrow stairs. The air grew still and cold, smelling of earth and forgotten things. He found the jar, its surface cool to his touch, and as he lifted it, he heard it, not a drip or a scuttle, but a faint, melodic hum. It seemed to rise from the very stones of the sealed well, a low, resonant vibration that thrummed through the soles of his boots. It was a sound without a source, a quiet, haunting melody that felt both ancient and deeply sad. He stood frozen, holding the jar of golden honey, and wondered if the stories were true, if the well did not hold water, but memory, and if the stones themselves were now beginning to sing. The humming from the pantry stones seemed to find an echo in the quiet of the library. While the castle slept, old Orin moved through the canyon like shelves, his lamp casting long, dancing shadows over leather-bound spines. He had heard young Finn's breathless account of the singing well, and the story had settled in his mind like a key finding its lock. He pulled a massive, crumbling volume from a high shelf, its cover tooled with strange, sinuous beasts. This was the Beshiri of forgotten things, a book most considered mere myth itself. He laid it open on his great oak desk, the parchment crackling with age, and beside it, he unrolled a rough sketch Lyra had given him of the creature from her dreams. His finger, stained with years of ink, traced the book's illustrations, a beast with a body of layered stone and a mouth open in a silent, eternal song. The text called it a stone singer, a being of earth and melody, said to have woven the foundations of the oldest castles with the vibrations of its deep, resonant voice. It did not build with hands, but with sound, shaping rock to its will, before falling into a slumber measured in centuries, its dreams seeping into the stones around it. Orin's breath caught. Lyra's dream, the singing well, the star petal's light, Erin's hidden murals, they were not separate mysteries. They were threads of a single, awakening tapestry. This was no ghost or omen. A living creature, as old as the mountain itself, was stirring from its long rest beneath their very feet. He carefully closed the ancient book, the weight of its knowledge settling on his shoulders. He could not wait for morning. Lady Elara needed to know that the heart of their home was not just stone and mortar, but a sleeping, dreaming giant, and its long silence was finally breaking. A tremor ran through the guard's arm as Anya pressed her fingers to his wrist. He was a strong man, one of Captain Kaelen's most steadfast, yet he lay shivering on the cot, despite the healer's hut being warm, with the scent of drying herbs and honeyed tea. He had collapsed near the gate to the lower bailey, he told her, his voice a ragged whisper. It was not the deep, rattling cough of a winter fever that concerned her, but the nature of his exhaustion. His skin was cool, his pulse a slow, distant drumbeat, as if his very life force were ebbing away on a tide no one could see. This was no simple chill. She had seen its like only once before, described in a crumbling scroll written by her grandmother. It was a soul weariness, a fatigue born not of the body, but of the spirit, a sign that the subtle, protective enchantments woven into the castle's foundation were fraying. The magic that had long sheltered the inhabitants, that made the stones feel like a living, breathing guardian, was growing thin. A quiet dread, cold and sharp, settled in Anya's chest. If the castle's hidden heart was failing, then the strange stirrings in the crypts and the songs from the well were not mere curiosities. They were symptoms of a much deeper sickness, and the guard's pallor was the first true shadow of a coming storm. The hearth fire in Lady Elara's solar cast long, dancing shadows across the faces gathered in secret council. She looked from Captain Kaelen's stern, resolved to Orin's scholarly intensity, and finally to Anya's quiet dread. No formal summons had been issued, only a glance, a nod, a shared understanding that the strange threads of the past days needed to be woven together now. Kalin spoke first, his voice low, of the hidden passage and the ancient murals depicting the realm's founding. Orin then laid the bestiary of forgotten things upon her table, its pages open to the stone singer, his finger pointing from the illustrated beast to Lyra's sketch of her dream. Anya's report was the most chilling, the guard's unnatural exhaustion, a stark symptom of a deeper malady. She called it a soul weariness, a sign that the protective magic woven into the castle's heart was failing. 4 separate truths, shared in hushed tones, coalesced into one undeniable reality. Their home was not built upon inert stone, but upon a slumbering, dreaming guardian, and its long rest was ending in a way that threatened them all. They could not wait for the long night to pass. To do nothing was to watch the very spirit of their home fade, leaving them exposed to a cold far deeper than winter. A pact was made there, not with grand oaths, but with a shared, solemn silence. They would find a way to reach the sleeping giant, to reinforce the ancient magic before its final note faded. It was a decision made in a single, breathless moment, one that would bind their fates as irrevocably as the stones were bound to the mountain. The hushed voices from Lady Elara's solar carried further than the council intended, their grave tones seeping through the ancient door like a draught. Aaron, meant to be fetching more firewood, stood frozen in the shadowed corridor, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He heard the words soul weariness and failing magic, and the weight of his discovery in the hidden passage, transformed from a thrilling secret into a crushing responsibility. It was his stumbling footstep that had started this, his curious hands that had pulled back the tapestry. He could not simply stand by while the grown-ups deliberated. The answer had to be there, in the painted stories on the hidden wall. Slipping away from the door, he moved with a new, grim purpose, his earlier fear now a distant memory. He knew the way back to the tapestry, his fingers finding the hidden catch with a practiced ease he did not know he possessed. The passage yawned open, darker and colder than he remembered, the air thick with the dust of centuries. This time, he did not stop to marvel at the familiar founding myths. He pushed on, his small torch guttering in the stagnant air, determined to find what he had missed before, some detail that would show them how to mend a breaking enchantment. He moved past the king, raising the city from the sea, past the family and the heart of stone, into a part of the corridor where the murals grew more strange and abstract. The figures became less human, their forms blending with the landscape itself, and there, at the very end of the passage where the wall was rough and unfinished, he saw it. It was not a grand scene of crowns or conquests, but a single, simple image painted in faded green and silver. It showed a hand, human and small, pressed gently against a great, layered stone that pulsed with a soft, internal light. A bridge of understanding, drawn in pigment and hope. Aaron knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was looking at the first step. But as he reached out his own hand to trace the image, the torch in his other hand flickered violently, and from the profound darkness behind him, he heard the distinct, soft scuff of a footstep on stone. Captain Kaelen moved through the castle's corridors with a new kind of purpose. His orders whispered only to those he trusted with his life. They were not to watch for invaders from beyond the walls, but for changes within the stone itself. He placed a stoic veteran named Rorik at the base of the great stair, where the air always carried a faint, cold draft. His instructions were simple. Watch the shadows between the torches. Listen for any sound that was not the drip of water or the sigh of the wind. Another guard, a woman named Lyra with keen ears, was stationed at the old granary, where the walls were the original mountain rock. She was to note any new fissures, any hum that was not the familiar groan of settling stone, and Kalin himself took the post he would entrust to no other, the arched entrance to the lower levels where the steps descended into utter blackness. He stood with his back to the warmer, inhabited parts of the castle, his hand resting on the worn pommel of his sword. His eyes were fixed on the darkness below, not because he expected a blade to emerge from it, but because he was waiting for the silence to change. He was a soldier, trained to face a tangible enemy, yet here he was, a sentinel against an echo, a guardian against a shift in the air. His sword felt like a useless weight, a tool for a world of flesh and blood, not for one of fading magic and dreaming stone. How do you stand ready for a battle that has no form, for an enemy that is the very ground beneath your feet? He could only wait, every sense stretched taut, hoping the first sign would be something he could understand. The sound of the loom was the only music in the deep of the night, a steady click and sigh that usually soothed Lyra's mind. But tonight, her hands were not her own. They flew across the warp and weft with a speed and certainty that frightened her, guided by a force that felt both ancient and immense. She watched, a mere spectator, as the shuttle wove threads of deep amethyst and brilliant silver, the colors of the stone singer from her dreams. The emerging pattern was no longer a symbolic tree or a collection of house sigils. It was a cross-section of the earth itself, layers of stone and soil, rendered in shades of brown and gray wool. And there, at the very center, nestled within a cavern of glittering quartz, her hands wove a perfect, luminous heart. It was crystalline, faceted like a gem, and from it pulsed delicate threads of light that spread like roots through the surrounding stone, vanishing into the tapestry's edges. A cold shock of understanding washed over her. This was not a picture, it was a diagram. The silver threads were not mere decoration, they were pathways. Her tapestry was a living map, and the heart it depicted was the true anchor of the castle's magic, the source of the protective enchantments that were now failing. She stumbled back from the loom, her breath catching in her throat. The urgency was a physical pressure in her chest. She had to find Lady Elara. The map was here, woven in plain sight, and it showed them exactly where they needed to go. Lantern light carved trembling circles in the absolute dark as they began the descent. The worn steps dipped in the center from centuries of unseen feet, each one taking them deeper into a cold that seeped through wool and leather alike. Lady Elara led, her hand resting on Orin's arm, the rolled tapestry map held tight in her other hand. Kalin came behind them, his presence a solid, silent bulwark against the pressing silence, while Anya brought up the rear, her healer's senses alert to the thinning of the air. The familiar sounds of the castle, above the distant murmur of voices, the faint clatter from the kitchens, had vanished, replaced by a quiet so profound it seemed to have weight. Their own breathing was loud in the narrow stairwell, their footfalls echoing back at them from the stone, as if the mountain itself were listening. They passed archways leading to older, forgotten levels, their openings like black mouths, exhaling a chill that carried the scent of wet rock and deep time. Lyra's woven map was more than a guide now. It was a tether to the world of light and life they had left behind. Each step downward felt like a step backward through the ages, into the root of the mountain, where their history and their hope were both buried. What would they find when they reached the bottom, this silent, sleeping heart of their home, and would they find it in time to mend the fraying enchantment that kept them all safe? The air in the crypts was so still it felt like glass. Orin ran his fingers over the wall, brushing away a thick curtain of cobwebs to reveal the surface beneath. It was not simple stone, but a tapestry of carved runes, their edges softened by centuries of silence. He leaned closer, his lamp throwing the ancient symbols into sharp relief. The language was archaic, a dialect of the old tongue he had only seen in fragments, but the story it told was clear and chilling. It spoke of the first lord of this house, a man who did not conquer the mountain, but pleaded with it. He came not with an army, but with an offering of stories, singing the great deeds of his people to the silent rock, and the mountain answered. From the deep earth emerged the stone singer, a being of layered stone and resonant song, who wove its own life force into the castle's foundations, creating the enchantments of protection and warmth that had sheltered them ever since. The pact was simple, beautiful, and terrifying. The singer would sustain the magic, but only so long as the stories were sustained in return. Its power was fed by memory, by the tales of courage and loss and hope, passed down through generations. The final runes were a warning, carved with a desperate urgency. Should the stories cease, should the songs be forgotten, the bond would wither. The singer would fade back into its slumber, and the magic would unravel like a thread pulled from a tapestry. Orin stared at the wall, the truth settling upon him with the weight of the mountain above. The soul weariness, the fading light, the silence from below. It was not an attack. It was a consequence. They had not been guarding a secret. They had been neglecting a promise. The very heart of their home was starving, not for food or gold, but for the sound of its own history. How many stories had been lost to time? How many songs had fallen silent in the busyness of mere survival? The answer was written on the wall before him, and in the weary face of the guard lying in the healer's hut. Their greatest danger was not what lay in the dark, but what they had forgotten in the light. The worn stone steps gave way to a rough, natural floor as the passage opened into a space so vast their lantern light could not find its ceiling. The air itself changed, losing the dusty closeness of the crypts for a cool, thin atmosphere that tasted of minerals and ancient stillness. Before them lay a cavern of impossible beauty, its walls and high arches encrusted with natural crystals that caught their feeble light and fractured it into 1,000 shimmering echoes. It was like standing inside a giant, dormant geode, and there, at the very center of this silent, glittering cathedral, lay the source of it all. It was a form of layered earth and smooth stone, curled upon itself like a great, slumbering beast. Its shape was the one from Lyra's Tapestry and Orin's Beshiri, a creature of the mountain's bones, but it was the sight at its core that stole the breath from their lungs. Nestled within the stone ribs was a heart, not of flesh, but of a single, enormous crystal. It should have blazed with an inner sun, a beacon of pure magic. Instead, it pulsed with a weak, rhythmic light, a dull and weary throb of gold that fought against a pervasive gray dimness. Each faint pulse was a little slower than the last, each interval of darkness a little longer. This was the confirmation of their deepest fear. The ancient magic was not just fraying at the edges, it was dying at its very source. The protective warmth that had cradled the castle for generations was seeping away into the cold stone, heartbeat by faltering heartbeat. They had found the singer, but they had found it on the precipice of an eternal silence. Anya knelt, her healer's senses reaching out, not to a pulse of blood, but to the faint, fading rhythm of the crystal heart. This was no peaceful sleep. It was a slow fading, a withering of essence, like a tree deprived of sunlight and water. The dimming light was a symptom of a deeper starvation. The truth settled over them all, cold and inescapable. The stone singer was not resting, it was dying. To save it, they could not simply stand and watch. They had to wake it, but how do you rouse a mountain? Kalen's hand went to his sword, hilt by instinct, but the blade was useless here. Force would only shatter the delicate balance. Orin's knowledge was a map of the past, but they needed a voice for the present. The answer was etched into the runes high above. The Pact demanded a story. Not a rehearsed tale or a dry recitation of facts, but a story told with true heart, one that held the very essence of their house, its courage, its sacrifice, its hope. It seemed a simple task to tell a story, yet in that moment, standing before the slumbering giant, the simplicity was the true weight. Which story could possibly be enough? Which memory held the power to reach across the centuries and rekindle a dying star? The future of their entire house, the warmth in their walls, and the strength in their stones, now rested on finding the right words and speaking them with a conviction that echoed all the way down to the roots of the earth. Lady Elara stepped forward, her own breath a small, warm cloud in the cavern's chill. The weight of her lineage settled on her shoulders, a mantle woven from every story ever told by her ancestors. She closed her eyes, pushing aside the cold dread that threatened to silence her. The right words were not in Orin's books or Kalen's strategies. They were in the oldest song of their people, the one sung not for glory, but for survival. She drew a slow breath, and when she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it carried, clear and resonant, into the vast, silent space. She began the tale of the first fire. It was not a story of kings or conquests, but of a single family, her family, lost and freezing in a winter, so deep it threatened to swallow the world. She spoke of the father who used the last of his strength to build a shelter against the biting wind, of the mother who gathered the last dry twigs with numb fingers, and of the child whose small, cold hands struck the flint again and again, refusing to give in to the dark. She did not just recite the events. She poured into her voice the desperation of that long night, the stubborn hope that flickered against impossible odds, the shared breath of a family huddled together, willing a single spark to catch. She spoke of the moment the first tiny flame leaped to life, not as a triumph, but as a shared breath of relief, a tiny, defiant sun that promised the dawn. As her words wove through the cavern, a subtle change stirred the air. The weak, grayish light within the crystal heart seemed to hesitate in its fading. For a single, suspended moment, the dim pulse held, as if listening to the echo of that long-ago struggle. A faint, almost imperceptible warmth brushed against their faces, like the first breath of spring after an endless frost. The story was a key, and for a heartbeat, it felt as if it had found its lock. But then the moment passed. The crystal's light dulled once more, its rhythm slipping back into its slow, weary decline. The tale had been heard, but it was not enough. It was a single thread offered to a tapestry that was unraveling too fast. The ancient bond required something more, a story not just remembered, but relived, a truth so powerful it could reignite a star. What memory could possibly hold that kind of fire? A single crystal near the singer's great stone heart flickered, casting a sudden, soft pinprick of gold into the cavern's gloom. It was a tiny response, no bigger than the first spark from a flint, but in that absolute silence, it was as brilliant as a beacon. Elara's voice caught for only a second, her heart leaping at the sight. Encouraged, she leaned into the story, her words shifting from a recounting of past events to a living invocation. She spoke no longer just of her ancestors, but of the home they built from that first fire, a shelter meant not for one family, but for all who sought refuge from the cold. Her voice swelled with the fierce, protective love of a mother for her child, with the unyielding resolve of a sentinel on the wall, with the simple, profound joy of a shared meal in a warm hall. She wove the very essence of unity into her tale, the invisible threads of loyalty and shared purpose that bind a people together, making them stronger than any single stone. As she spoke of the warmth of home, not as a physical heat, but as the comfort of known voices and the safety of belonging, the air in the cavern began to change. The stale, motionless chill began to stir, a gentle current moving around them as if the mountain itself were taking a deep, slow breath. The flicker in the single crystal pulsed, holding its light a little longer, and then, like a contagion of hope, the soft golden gleam spread to the crystal beside it. A low, resonant hum, so deep it was felt more than heard, vibrated up through the soles of their boots. The spell was being woven, not of magic, but of memory and hope, and the slumbering giant was beginning to listen. Kaelin's voice joined hers next, a low and steady rumble that spoke of oaths kept in the dark and shields raised not for glory, but for the person standing beside you. He spoke of the silent, understanding between sentinels on the wall, of shared rations in a lean season, of the unbroken line of trust that turns a group of individuals into a fortress. His words were not grand, but they were solid, each one a stone laid in a wall of shared purpose. As he spoke of a soldier's quiet pride in the safety of the hearths he guards, the deep hum from the stone floor strengthened, resonating with the vibration of his voice. Then Orin added his thread to the tapestry, his tone measured and full of wonder. He spoke of knowledge not as a possession, but as a torch passed from one hand to the next through the generations, a light that prevents the long night from becoming eternal. He recounted the patient scribes who had preserved their history, the curiosity that asked why the stars shine and how the roots drink, the profound comfort of understanding the world just a little more. His was a story of the mind's loyalty to truth, and as he spoke, the crystals in the cavern seemed to brighten, their light reflecting in his aged, earnest eyes. Finally, Anya's voice wove into the chorus, soft as a poultice and just as strengthening. She did not speak of dramatic cures, but of the quiet magic in a cool cloth on a fevered brow, in the steady presence beside a sick through the night, in the simple act of bearing witness to another's pain. Her story was one of mending, of the invisible threads of care that bind a community back together when it threatens to fray. She spoke of healing as the ultimate act of hope, a belief in a future worth recovering for. As their four voices intertwined loyalty, knowledge, healing, and hope, they ceased to be separate stories. They became a single resonant chord that filled the cavern, a harmonic frequency that the stone itself seemed to remember. The vibration rose through their boots, up into their bones, a tangible energy flowing back toward the slumbering heart. The gray dimness shrouding the great crystal heart began to churn like mist in a morning sun, its weak, faltering pulse gathering strength, beating in time with the rhythm of their united song. A low groan rumbled up from the very foundations of the earth, a sound of ancient stone shifting after 1,000 years of stillness. The cavern floor trembled beneath their feet, not with violence, but with a profound sense of motion, as if the mountain were stretching its limbs. The dim, grayish light within the stone singer's heart churned and then ignited, flooding the entire cavern with a brilliance that had no heat, only a pure, cleansing radiance. It was the light of a long-lost dawn, growing brighter with every word of their shared story, until the crystal walls blazed with reflected gold, and every shadow was banished. Then, from within the folds of layered rock, two great forms slowly unveiled themselves. They were eyes, vast and luminous, polished to a perfect, knowing sheen like immense gemstones. They held no pupil, only a deep, swirling light that seemed to contain the slow, patient turning of the constellations. A deep, resonant hum bloomed in the air, so rich and full, it was less a sound and more a physical sensation, a vibration that washed over the small group, sinking into their bones and soothing the very ache from their souls. This was not the hum of a machine or a storm. It was a song of gratitude, a melody of connection renewed, a wave of power that was not destructive, but restorative. The oppressive cold was swept away, replaced by a gentle, pervasive warmth that felt like the first true day of spring after the longest winter. In that moment, they were not standing before a beast or a god, but in the presence of a partner, an ancient guardian who had heard their call and was answering with the full force of its rekindled spirit. The light did not simply shine upon them, It flowed through them, mending the frayed edges of their own weariness and filling the cavern with the undeniable truth that the bond was whole once more. The great gemstone eyes held them in a gaze that felt both ancient and deeply personal. Then, with a movement that was less a shift of mass and more a reordering of stone itself, one immense, layered limb slowly extended. Its touch upon the cavern wall was impossibly gentle, a whisper of earth against earth. Where its stone fingers met the raw rock, a line of pure, white light traced itself into being. It curved and spiraled, weaving a symbol more complex than any in the runes above, a pattern that seemed to contain the very concept of a promise. This was not a renewal of the old pact, but the creation of a new one, forged in the crucible of their shared effort. The rune pulsed with a soft, steady light, a permanent seal upon their bond, a reminder that the magic lived not just in the mountain, but in the continued breath of their stories. Then, from the heart of that glowing symbol, a small piece of the wall detached itself. It was no larger than a clenched fist, a smooth, dark stone that drifted through the air to land softly in Lady Alara's waiting hands. It was warm to the touch, and from its core emanated a quiet, melodic hum, a tiny, perfect echo of the singer's own revitalized song. This was its gift, a touchstone of memory. The stone's eternal melody was a living lullaby for the house, a constant, gentle reminder of the connection they had almost lost. It would sit in the great hall, its soothing hum a backdrop to daily life, ensuring that no matter how busy or troubled the times became, the power of shared purpose and the duty of storytelling would never again fall into silence. It was a seed of the mountain's heart, entrusted to their care, so they might always remember the sound of their own unity. A profound, almost musical silence followed them up the winding stairs, the singing stone in Elara's hands a soft, constant hum against the deep quiet of the mountain. As they climbed from the deep dark into the levels of the living castle, the air itself seemed to change. The oppressive chill that had clung to the lower corridors for weeks was gone, replaced by a gentle, ambient warmth that felt like a long-held breath finally released. They emerged into the great hall to find the hearth fire burning with a steadier, brighter flame, its light no longer fighting the shadows, but embracing the room in a soft, golden glow. The first person they saw was the guard who had been stricken with the soul weariness. He was on his feet, his color restored, speaking in a clear, strong voice to a fellow sentry about the watch rotation. He saw them, and his eyes widened with a sudden, knowing clarity. He did not bow, but placed a hand over his heart, a gesture of profound gratitude that said more than any words could. The strange fatigue had lifted, not just from him, but from the entire castle. You could feel it in the very atmosphere, a lightness, a sense of relief so deep it seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. The invisible shield of protection, woven from the stone singer's rekindled heart, was firmly back in place, mending the frayed edges of their world. The mission was a success, a quiet victory heard not in triumphant shouts, but in the simple, steady rhythm of a heart beating in sync with a mountain once more. The singing stone found its home on the great hearth's mantle, its warm, melodic hum weaving seamlessly with the crackle of the fire. It was a sound that did not command attention, but simply existed, a foundational note in the room's new symphony of peace. One by one, the household gathered, drawn not by a summons, but by an instinct, a deep, cellular pull toward the warmth. They settled on benches and thick fur rugs, their postures softening, the lines of worry and weariness that had marked their faces for weeks slowly easing away. A profound sense of safety descended upon the great hall, a feeling so tangible it was like a warm, weightless blanket being laid over every soul. It was the safety of a child sleeping in its parents' arms, a deep and unshakable knowing that you are protected, that the walls around you are not just stone, but living guardians. In this quiet atmosphere, stories began to surface, not as formal recitations, but as gentle offerings. An old gardener remembered his grandfather's tale of a winter so fierce the wolves sought shelter in the stables, and how they were given warmth, not driven out. A young kitchen maid, her voice barely a whisper, shared a memory of her mother singing a specific lullaby, a tune no one else knew, yet now felt familiar to all who heard it. Each story, each small memory, was like a log added to the fire, strengthening the communal flame. The stone's hum seemed to resonate with each telling, a quiet affirmation that these moments, these shared human experiences, were the true fuel for the magic that cradled them all. What forgotten memory might you offer to such a fire? What small piece of your own story would help to keep the darkness at bay? Lyra found herself before the great loom once more, but the frantic, unguided energy that had possessed her hands was gone. In its place was a calm and certain rhythm, her fingers moving with the effortless grace of a river finding its course. The final panels of the tapestry grew swiftly under her touch. She wove the glittering cavern in threads of amethyst and quartz, the great stone heart blazing with gold, and the small, humble figures standing before it, their faces turned upward in awe. She did not need to invent or interpret. Her hands were simply recording a truth her own eyes had witnessed, translating the memory of light and song into color and texture. When she at last cut the final thread, the tapestry was complete. It was no longer a map of hidden places or a collection of prophetic dreams. It hung in the great hall, a vibrant, breathing chronicle of their shared triumph. It showed the founding myths from the hidden passage, yes, but it wove them seamlessly into the new story, the story of the silent, pact almost broken, and the united voices that had mended it. Children would point to the figures of Lady Elara and Captain Kaelen, of Orin and Anya, and ask to hear the tale of the night the mountain woke. The tapestry was no longer a record of what was. It had become a new legend for the house, a permanent reminder that their greatest strength was not in stone or steel, but in the unbreakable threads of cooperation and the courage to remember a forgotten promise. The gentle hum of the singing stone was a constant companion to Aaron's thoughts in the days that followed. He moved through his duties in the stonemason's yard with a new awareness, feeling the texture of the rock beneath his tools not as inert material, but as a substance that had once answered a song. His hands, which had only known the weight of hammer and chisel, now itched with a different kind of work. He found Orin in his usual spot, a fortress of parchment and leather-bound silence in the library, the lamplight catching the silver in the old man's hair. Aaron's request was hesitant, a quiet question spoken into the hushed air. He asked if he might split his days, learning the strength of stone with his hands in the yard, and learning the strength of stories with his mind in this room. Orin looked up from his crumbling text, his eyes, usually lost in the past, focusing on the boy with a sudden, sharp clarity. He did not see a mischievous child who had stumbled upon a secret passage, but the young face of a future chronicler, a living bridge between the physical foundation of their home and the memory that gave it soul. His agreement was a simple nod, but it carried the weight of a solemn appointment. In that silent exchange, a new duty was born, one that would not be recorded in any official ledger. Orin would become a keeper of the small tales as well as the great ones, the stories of the gardener and the cook, the guard and the weaver, ensuring that the tapestry of their shared life would never again grow thin from neglect. The true strength of a castle, he was beginning to understand, is not measured by the thickness of its walls, but by the richness of the stories echoing within them. The guard's hand was steady as he passed Anya a heavy water skin, his grip firm where before it had been feeble. She watched him move through the drills in the lower bailey, his steps sure and his breath forming strong, even clouds in the crisp air. The sole weariness that had leached the color from his face was gone, replaced by a vigor that seemed to radiate from his very core. It was more than a simple recovery. It was a restoration, as if the mountain's renewed heartbeat had refilled a cup he had been slowly emptying for months. Later, in the quiet of her hut, the scent of chamomile and crushed mint rising around her, Anya prepared her remedies with a new thoughtfulness. She reached for the small pouch of fine, shimmering dust she had carefully brushed from the singing stone on the mantel. Adding just a pinch to her infusion of willow bark and honey, she watched as the mixture seemed to hold the light differently, the liquid shimmering with a soft, golden depth. The resulting tonic carried not just the familiar warmth of herbs, but a faint, foundational hum, a subtle echo of the earth's own mending magic. It was as if her healing arts, once a solitary craft, now had a partner in the very stones of the castle, their combined strength weaving a deeper, more enduring peace into those she sought to comfort. A cool night breeze whispered across the battlements, carrying the clean scent of pines from the distant slopes. Captain Kaelen walked his usual patrol, his boots making a familiar, rhythmic sound on the cold stone. He paused at the western corner, his gaze sweeping automatically over the dark landscape below, his mind checking for any flicker of torchlight where none should be, for any break in the pattern of shadows that signaled intrusion. But tonight, the habit felt empty. The vigilance was there, a part of his bones, but the tension that usually accompanied it was gone. The watchful dread that had been his constant companion for years had simply vanished. He found himself looking not just at the land, but at the stars, their sharp, icy clarity, a sight he had often been too preoccupied to truly see. The castle wall beneath his hand felt different. It was not just a barrier of rock, a passive thing he was tasked to defend. It felt warm with the day's stored sun, and a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration hummed up through the stone, a steady, silent pulse that matched the rhythm of his own calm heartbeat. He was not standing guard alone. The fortress itself was awake and aware, its ancient sentience woven back into the very mortar. This was the true meaning of the Pact, not a magical shield to block arrows, but this profound, shared responsibility. The weight of every life within these walls was no longer his to carry alone. He leaned on the parapet, his shoulders relaxing into a posture they had long forgotten. For the first time in a lifetime of duty, Captain Kaelen took a deep, unburdened breath and simply enjoyed the quiet majesty of the night, a sentinel standing with a friend in the dark. A soft, silver light greeted Brahm as he pushed open the glasshouse door at first light. He stood for a long moment, his breath catching in his throat. The star petal plant, which had held only a single, tightly closed bud the evening before, was now a cascade of open flowers. Their petals were not merely silver, but seemed spun from captured moonlight, each one radiating a gentle, internal luminescence that pushed back the shadows of the early morning. They were larger than any he had ever seen, their centers holding a dusting of gold that shimmered like a promise. This was no simple flowering. It was an eruption of pure vitality, a celebration written in light and leaf. He knelt, his old joints complaining, but his heart was lighter than it had been in years. He understood. The earth itself was rejoicing, and this was its song. With hands that trembled not from age but from reverence, he produced a small, worn pouch of softest leather from his pocket. He worked with infinite care, using a tiny brush to gather the luminous seeds that nestled at the heart of each bloom. They were like minuscule pearls that held their own soft glow, each one a potential new beginning. He would dry them, protect them, and plant them in the spring, not just in the rich soil of the glass house, but in the castle gardens for all to see. This radiant bloom would not be a solitary event, a secret witnessed only by him. It would become a legacy. The silver flowers would stand for generations as a living testament to the house's resilience, a quiet, growing reminder that even after the longest, coldest night, the earth remembers how to sing. The sweet, heady scent of mulling spices and honey began to drift from the kitchens, a fragrant promise that wove itself through the great hall and up the winding stairwells. Head cook Marta, her face flushed from the heat of the great ovens, was directing a symphony of creation. She did not use the precious, humming honey from the sealed well for everyday fare. Today, she poured it into a batter rich with ground nuts and dried berries, the recipe a secret melody passed from mother to daughter. This was not mere sustenance. It was a sacrament of shared relief, a tangible expression of the warmth that had returned to their home. The cake that emerged was dark and fragrant, and as she drizzled it with a warm honey glaze, the aroma became a celebration in itself, a scent that spoke directly to the heart of comfort and belonging. When the first slices were carried out on great platters, the celebration began without a single word of announcement. A lord sitting by the hearth accepted a piece with a grateful nod, while a young scullion, her hands still damp from washing pots, was handed a thick, warm slice, her eyes widening at the unexpected honor. There were no separate tables, no distinctions of rank in that moment, only the shared, simple pleasure of a sweet, warm cake, and the profound understanding that they had all endured the same long fear, and now shared the same profound relief. The sweetness on their tongues was the taste of a promise kept, a communal sigh of contentment that strengthened the invisible bonds holding their house together. In the simple, profound act of breaking bread, or in this case, sharing cake, the magic they had restored in the deep earth was made real in the laughter and quiet smiles filling the hall. A quiet voice, younger than the others that had spoken, rose from near the hearth. Elara the maid, her namesake nodding for her to continue, clasped her hands and began the story her grandmother had told her on just such a long night. It was the tale of the stargazer, a lonely young woman who spent her evenings on the highest tower, charting the heavens not for glory, but for the simple comfort of their constant, silent dance. One night, she saw a single star break from its fixed path, a sliver of silver light streaking down to vanish into the depths of the castle's oldest, sealed well. Compelled by a feeling she could not name, she descended into the quiet dark, and there, resting in the mud at the bottom, she found not a cold rock, but a small, warm stone that pulsed with a soft, captured light. A voice, clear as crystal, spoke to her from the stone. It offered a single wish, a chance to change her fate, to ask for riches or love or power. The stargazer held the warm light in her hands and thought of her lonely nights, of the empty halls below, of the quiet ache in her own heart. But she did not wish for any of those things. Instead, she asked that the starlight be returned to the sky, so that its light might comfort others who felt alone in the vast darkness. As she spoke her selfless wish, the stone dissolved into 1,000 motes of silver light that rose from the well, weaving themselves back into the tapestry of the night sky, forming a new, gentle constellation that still shines on the clearest of winter nights. As the young maid's soft voice wove the final threads of the story, it blended perfectly with the humming stone's gentle drone and the fire's steady crackle, the three melodies merging into a single, soothing lullaby that seemed to slow the very passage of time. The listeners felt their thoughts grow soft at the edges, their eyelids heavy, their breathing deepening into the easy rhythm of those who are safe, heard, and utterly at peace. A deep and satisfying quiet settled over the great hall, a silence rich with the shared warmth of the evening. The last murmured conversation had faded, the final story had been told, and now only the soft, rhythmic sounds of peaceful sleep remained. One by one, in their chairs and nestled on thick furs before the hearth, the members of the household had surrendered to their rest. An old guardsman, his head tilted back against the stone wall, breathed in a slow, steady cadence. A young weaver, curled like a fern, smiled faintly in her dreams. They were all held in the gentle embrace of the castle, wrapped not just in wool and fur, but in the lingering magic of the tales they had shared. The fire burned low, its light a soft, pulsing amber that danced across sleeping faces and was answered by the gentle, answering hum of the stone on the mantle. The great hall, once a place of urgent counsels and whispered fears, had been transformed into a sanctuary of profound peace, its every stone a silent, watchful guardian over the dreams unfolding within its walls. It was a picture of perfect trust, a community resting secure in the knowledge that they were protected by something far older and stronger than any army. Their collective exhalation was the final, quiet note in the song that had mended their world, a lullaby for the house itself, promising that the long night had truly, finally, come to an end. Lady Alara's gaze drifted from face to sleeping face, each one a quiet testament to the peace they had won together. The gentle drone of the singing stone wove through the soft crackle of the fire, a foundational note in the hall's new and tranquil music. She felt the certainty of it deep in her bones, a knowledge that went beyond thought. The castle's safety had never truly rested on the height of its walls or the strength of its gates. Those were merely the physical expression of a far deeper magic, one that lived in the breath of a shared story and the rhythm of a communal song. It was a magic that asked not for power, but for remembrance, not for conquest, but for connection. This was the legacy they would carry forward, a truth as enduring as the mountain itself. Their great house would stand not because its stones were immovable, but because the tales told within them were unbreakable. And as she watched the steady rise and fall of every chest in the room, she knew, with a contentment as warm and solid as the hearthstone itself, that this legacy would shelter them through all the winters yet to come.